In 2024, inside a medium-security prison in Indiana, something happened that even the oldest guards hadn't seen in their decades of service. A week passed and not a single disciplinary report was filed. Not one. No fights, no shouting, not even a missed head count. At first, they thought it was a fluke. But then the warden pointed to something new: small metal cages in a converted storage room and a stack of virtual reality headsets. That's where we meet Carl Jenkins. 61 years old, doing time for a mistake made back in '98. No visitors, no letters, no real hope. But one morning, he stepped into that cage, strapped on a headset, and suddenly, he was walking a beach in Oregon, listening to waves he hadn't heard in 25 years. What happened next? It changed everything. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Before the headset, Carl's days bled into each other like pages in an old, weathered book. He woke up every morning to the same sound, the clank of boots in the hallway and the buzz of fluorescent lights that never turned off. Breakfast was at 6:30 sharp, always lukewarm and always quiet. He spent most of his time in the prison library, sorting tattered paperbacks no one read. Carl wasn't a troublemaker. He kept to himself, kept his head down, and counted years by the birthdays he no longer celebrated. He'd learned not to expect much. After 26 years behind bars, your world shrinks. Hopes turn into habits. But the prison was changing. Rumors were spreading, talk of something new, something strange. A room down the hall that wasn't there before. And for reasons Carl couldn't quite explain, he felt a pull toward it. It started on a Tuesday. Carl was shelving a stack of old mystery novels when he noticed something strange. Cell block C was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Normally, that wing was full of noise, arguments over card games, heavy footsteps, the occasional shouting match. But that day, it was calm. Even the correctional officers seemed different, more relaxed, more watchful. At lunch, Carl overheard two younger inmates whispering about the cage room. Something about headsets. Something about flying. That night, instead of going straight to his bunk, Carl paused by the hallway leading to the administrative wing. A door that used to be locked now stood ajar, with soft light spilling out. Inside, he glimpsed something strange: an inmate sitting completely still, head tilted back, a bulky headset covering his eyes. For the first time in years, Carl felt something unexpected: curiosity. What were they seeing behind those visors? Over the next few days, the atmosphere shifted. Inmates who used to carry tension in their shoulders now walked with a strange calm. One man, who hadn't spoken a word in months, suddenly asked Carl if he'd ever been to Paris. Paris? In this place? It didn't make sense. Another guy, young, hot-headed, always looking for a fight, started sketching mountain landscapes in the rec room. Carl watched in silence as more and more names were called over the intercom to report to room 12. He asked a guard about it once. The answer was vague: pilot program, therapy. But Carl wasn't convinced. The change was too real, too quick. One night, from his bunk, he overheard a man whisper through the wall, "Felt like I was flying, like I was alive again." That sentence stuck with Carl. Not because it sounded dramatic, but because it didn't. He began to wonder, what would he feel if it were him? One morning, Carl's name was finally called. Jenkins. Room 12. His first instinct was to decline. He didn't like surprises. But something in him stirred, and without a word, he stood up and followed the officer. The room was cooler than he expected. Clean, clinical. A quiet hum filled the space. A young counselor greeted him, Rebecca, no uniform, just a clipboard and a calm smile. "We're trying something different," she said. "It's voluntary, but it's helped people reconnect with parts of themselves they thought were gone." She explained the headset-controlled simulations designed to mimic life outside. Nature. Routine. Even moments of choice. Carl was skeptical, but when she asked if he'd like to try, he nodded. Slowly. As the headset lowered onto his face, he wasn't sure what to expect. But then the screen lit up and Carl heard something he hadn't heard in decades: waves crashing on a beach, seagulls overhead, and the wind calling his name. The beach faded slowly, replaced by a dim room and Rebecca's voice. "How do you feel?" Carl couldn't answer right away. His chest was tight, like he'd remembered something important and forgotten it all over again. That night, lying awake in his bunk, the waves still echoed in his ears. But what unsettled him more wasn't what he saw, it was what one of the other inmates quietly told him afterward. "They're tracking how we react. Heart rate, eye movement, if we cry." Carl didn't like that. Not because he had something to hide, but because for the first time in years, he'd felt something real, and now it might be just another test. Just another report. It made him wonder, was this truly about helping them, or was it data for someone else's gain? And if so, what did that make him? An inmate? A patient? Or just a subject in someone's experiment? A week later, Carl was offered a longer session in advanced simulation. It helps prepare you for re-entry, Rebecca said. But Carl had no release date. He knew it and she knew it. That's when the truth landed hard. This wasn't just therapy. It was a testbed. A system being built on men like him, men who might never see freedom but could simulate it for someone else's benefit. Carl hesitated. The session promised more: familiar faces, the smell of his old workshop, even the illusion of holding a grandchild he never got to meet. But accepting meant giving in, letting them mine his memories, his regrets, his humanity, and turn them into data. Refusing meant going back to numbness, to routine, to quiet survival. He sat in the chair, headset in hand. Heart pounding. What do you do when the only taste of freedom comes with a price? Carl took the session. He saw his childhood home, the old red pickup, even his mother's handwriting on a note by the fridge. It was so vivid, so real, he forgot where he was until the simulation glitched. The sky flickered. A voice, not his mother's, said, "Emotional peak detected. Logging response." And just like that, the moment shattered. He yanked off the headset, breathless, furious. Rebecca was gone. In her place, a tech assistant calmly took notes, eyes never meeting his. Later, Carl learned she'd been reassigned. Just part of the program rotation, the guard said. But it didn't feel like coincidence. He realized then he'd let them in too far. They weren't helping him heal. They were learning how to control feeling itself. For days, he shut down, refused sessions, returned to silence. But one evening, through the cell bars, a young inmate passed him a note. For words, shaky handwriting, "It helped me remember." And Carl held on to that. Carl didn't return to every session, but he didn't walk away completely. Instead, he found a balance, using the VR time not to escape, but to remember who he was before prison changed him. Slowly, he started writing letters again, long overdue apologies and stories he'd never shared. The headset became less a cage and more a window, an opportunity to reconnect with feelings he'd buried deep. The prison reported fewer incidents, but for Carl, the real change was quieter, a small spark of hope, a fragile sense that even behind bars, healing was possible. He couldn't rewrite his past, but for the first time in decades, he could imagine a future, one shaped not just by punishment, but by understanding. What would you do if you had the chance to relive moments lost to time? Months passed, and Carl's world, though still confined by walls, felt a little less heavy. He joined a small support group inside the prison, sharing his VR experiences cautiously but honestly. Others listened, some skeptical, others hopeful. Carl knew the headset wasn't magic, it couldn't undo years of loss or erase the past. But it opened a door, a reminder that healing often starts in the smallest moments of connection. Still, Carl wondered about the price paid for this glimpse of freedom. How much of himself was truly his, and how much was shaped by the program's design? Would virtual memories ever be enough to prepare someone for real life? And perhaps the hardest question, if given the chance, would we all choose simulated freedom over real consequences? What do you think? Would you take that chance?